The birth of the opioid crisis started in the United States in the late 1990s and only worsened over the years. The forthcoming Hulu series, Dopesick, takes a look back at how opioids made their way into hospitals and doctors' offices and became a widely prescribed painkiller. Take a look at this clip.
The FDA, justice, the doctors, they all want their drugs. And Big Pharma will spend everything they can to make sure that they get them. And this is just gonna keep going and going till we're all just one big pill-popping zombie nation.
Have you seen Purdue's I Got My Life Back video?
Sure.
It's a fraud. They were told it was a PSA when they shot it. And several of those participants became addicted.
A few of them are dead. Or close to it.
You know who'll be interested in that? Sarah Miller and Judy Cohen
Sarah Miller, Judy Cohen.
at the DOJ's Office of Consumer Litigation.
Well, I thought they were all conspirators in the upcoming zombie apocalypse.
Not everybody. Now, that was my tip for the day, boys, so if you can both kindly off, I'd certainly be better off for it.
Thank you, Bridget.
Sorry about your divorce.
I'm joined by one of the stars of Dopesick, actor and activist Rosario Dawson. Rosario, welcome.
Thank you. It's so tragic to watch Bridget again in that moment, the cynicism, that you can't help, I think, but start to get when you're working on cases like this and with situations like this. And she, as the character, she's sort of an amalgamation of a few people, but was just really at the heart and center at the very beginning of this crisis. And when you see this like tidal wave coming and you know that you can't stop it, but you try anyway because it's the right thing to do. It's just,
Right.
It's really devastating.
Absolutely. How much did you know about the backstory of the crisis before you took on this role?
Well, unfortunately, this is a crisis that has touched a lot of people. So I have family members who became opioid addicts because of starting with actual prescription of OxyContin. And some of them aren't alive anymore. Some of them didn't raise their families and, ended up getting divorced and being estranged from their family. The whole livelihood's destroyed. I recently had a friend come to visit me who'd had an injury, and she was given one bottle of OxyContin, and she came to stay with me, and she ended up staying for about a month. So she ran out. It was only supposed to be the one bottle anyway. But by the
Right.
time she got back home, she started feeling really bad effects. So she had to go withdrawal. She had to get another medication from her doctor to help her with the withdrawal symptoms. And that was off of one bottle that she took exactly as prescribed, and that's the thing, is that so many people are very sensitive to this, and it can start to almost immediately start to change your body's chemistry.
Right, right. Can you tell us a little bit about the character that you play in this, who's a DEA agent? And you're right, we see her sort of in that scene with the cynicism and with the intensity of all of this washing over her. But could you give us a little bit about her backstory?
Yeah. So I play DEA Bridget Meyer. Again, she's sort of an amalgamation of a couple of characters. But that means that there are scenes in this that are word for word. And, she was on the case. The pill came out in 96, and she was on them in 99. And had the room she'd been in and the argument she was making been more effective, had she been able to find more collaborators, it really would have turned the tide. She still was very crucial in making inroads, helping, to change certain things and access points and stuff. But you can see in this scene, just how much the toll that it took on her. And I think that's what's really brilliant about what Danny Strong did. He took a risk in having this story. He's the showrunner for this.
Yeah.
He took a risk in having the story kind of jump around through the years to get the story correctly expressed and to give you the breadth of people that this pill affected. So not just the doctors, not just the coal miners, not just the executives, not just the folks who were going out there and peddling all of this, but
Right.
also the people working on the cases and the families that don't even take the pill, but how they're affected by it. It's just a really, I think, a very brilliant way of sort of showing the multi-layer effects of this and how people's lives were devastated who didn't even take the pill.
Right, right. That so much of this ripples out beyond the individual person, beyond the individual case, right? That it's so much bigger. I guess, how are you hoping that the series sort of brings like greater understanding to the public or to those sort of not directly affected by the crisis?
I think a few things. One, I hope, unlike what we saw with the crack and cocaine epidemics and the three strikes rule and the devastation that happened with the war on drugs in communities across low income neighborhoods, which tended to be Black and brown, where there was just very little sympathy and empathy and actually quite aggressive approaches to what these communities were struggling with, being bombarded with drugs. I hope that people start to see and recognize more about what addiction really is and the effects on the body and the brain, and the realities with which getting through it requires different approaches than people have really wanted to do. My mom was one of those folks who very early 80s, 90s was doing harm reduction tactics like handing out needles to people who were addicts so that HIV wouldn't spread. And that
Yeah.
was considered very taboo and very negative. But it's like we are dealing with compound issues here, and we have to get very creative about how we, approach them. And so methadone clinics and all kinds of stuff that people kind of push back against. You've seen whole states push back against the ACA, just be, healthcare, people just really not having access to the resources that they need. And I hope that this builds that empathy that makes people realize that they can fight for this stuff and that it will make a trickle down effect to all of the people in their community, not just maybe their grandmother or their sister, but for the person on the street maybe, or the addict that you see on the corner, being able to get access to the kind of help that they need. So I also feel like we need to put pressure on our, the politicians and we have to have stricter laws. There's lots of legislation and a lot of cases, and where we are now, because this case is still ongoing with the Sackler family in Purdue. There's actually a bill in Congress called the Sackler Act that they're trying to pass to make sure that we're able to hold these companies and these families who are behind them accountable, and that they can clean up the mess that they started. So I think the breadth and the scope with which this story unfolds and lets you know all the characters who are part of it, all the decision makers that made this possible, that need to be brought to justice. I think it'll hopefully really empower people to better know what to do, and to to put the kind of pressure on our legislators that they need to have in order to pass acts like this.
Right. What would happen if we treated addiction as a public health issue and not as a criminal justice one when it comes to individual people being affected by it, right? How different of a country might we live in?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. There's sort of a common thread of interest in ways of bringing about big and systemic change throughout some of the works that you've taken on, whether that's on screen or kind of outside of it. And, I wanted to switch gears for a second and just ask you a little bit about Voto Latino and co-founding that, more than 15 years ago now. What sort of drove you to do that then? And, what kind of impact has it had in that stretch of time?
I guess much like what I hope to happen with Dopesick, and to inspire people and educate people and amplify certain messages, is just basically all the things that I care about in general. So I grew up in a squat in the Lower East Side. I saw firsthand how much you can't compartmentalize these issues around housing and access to education and healthcare, that all of these things are intertwined and interconnected, and that a lot of people fall into, traps because it's all compounded. And so for me, I've always been a big proponent of amplifying the messages of the organizers that I work with. Thank God for community organizers. And wanting to not just champion that with the different causes or joining boards or sharing messages, but recognizing that all of us have a tool, whether we have funds to donate or time to volunteer, we can vote. That is across genders, cultures, race, physical abilities. Like, we all have this opportunity to show up and vote, and by doing so, that's the umbrella to all of the issues that affect us all. And if we galvanize people to understand that power, we can make the real kind of critical changes that maybe we can't dedicate all our time, money, and energy and resources to in activism or public service or whatever. And so when I saw that Latinos became the largest minority in the country, it just seemed like, whoa, this is
Yeah.
a sleeping giant. And we need to make sure that they are ready to take the reins as that population continues to grow in number and influence.
Yeah. I mean, how it's been really interesting to think about that in light of all the voter suppression bills being put forth right now. And I guess
Mhm.
how is the organization addressing some of that? Because they're being put forth in multiple states, right? And what can other people do to support some of that work?
Well, we do definitely multi-pronged approach. We have lawsuits that we're a part of, kind of calling out the unconstitutionality of these things. Collaborations, we work with a lot of different organizers, trying to get information and information out to folks, galvanizing people, obviously, to vote. We've always been very collaborative and very resourceful when it comes to using our small means. We're a small organization to make a big impact. So everything from, we were the first ones to do voter texting technology, so you could do voter registration. Now we have an app for so you can do voter registration on you per state. We have different collaborators. We helped to start the National Voter Registration Day. It was us and, like, I think 4 or 5 other organizations. So we're just we're very keyed into finding the right kind of committees and um, collaborators to get the agenda moved across, because we don't get all the funds. The biggest issue that we see is that people will throw a lot of money behind a particular candidate, and you'll
Mm,
see so much money be spent on, attack ads. I mean, millions, hundreds of millions of dollars,
right.
right? And you give us $1 million, $2 million, we have a very strong track record with our community and reaching out to people and empowering them of when and how to vote. And if you don't get those votes, then that candidate and all that money that was
Right.
spent on the media just disappears. And
Right.
what we're really always trying to push is for folks to understand, especially with disinformation and misinformation out there, which we have a whole strategy against, and we've been working to really push back against, because it's devastating people. And folks are being very much convinced to vote against themselves and their best interests, or not vote at all. And that is really scary. So we just try to do as multi-pronged approach as possible, and try to really push people to give us and other voting organizations the resources that we need. I think people like Stacey Abrams has shown what it makes a difference it makes to have people on the ground and working within these communities for years on end and growing a base, so that when you need them, they can show up and they feel like you're really there with them, not just calling on them every 2 to 4 years.
Right. Right. Not just reaching out when you need them, when they can do something for you.
Hmm.
Absolutely. If I can shift gears for a quick moment before I have to let you go here, I would really, really love to hear about Studio 189, the fashion line that you co-founded as well. What was the inspiration behind that, and what sort of excites you about fashion as another space, as another site of expression?
So, my great grandmother was a seamstress for the Ladies International Garment Workers Union. And that was the first sort of organizing that passed down in my family of like union organizing. And, you know, my grandmother was taken along on that, and she would translate the materials, and my mom used to be there. And then in tow, she brought me to all her marches. And, you know, Abrima has a really similar background with her family as well. And recognizing that young, you know, intense women in New York who has family members that they can point to that really made a lot of sacrifices to get us to the point where we are. And going around the world and meeting, you know, the people that we are, you know, that we're connected with, and no different than us, except they were born in a different zip code. Well, how can we better recognize everyone, like the people like my great grandmother and beyond, who should be able to be dignified with work and with good living wage work. So I remember I took, you know, Brima comes from, you know, she worked at Hermes and Bottega Veneta. She speaks French, Italian. She's just like brilliant. We met as teenagers. I've been a huge fan of hers forever. And I invited her. She was one of the only people I could think to invite. And I was amazed that she said yes. I'm so grateful, to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, because I'm on the board of V-Day. V currently used to be Eve Ensler, had invited us. We were opening up the City of Joy. And Abrima was reading Muhammad Yunus's work, everything on microloans and social business. And then here we are in this space that was created for women to know their rights, to be empowered, to be supported, who had been the victim of abuse, sexual trauma because of conflict mineral mining. And we were saying, okay, how can we take the resources and the opportunities and, you know, the things that we've been able to build up in New York and in our families and in our communities in the States, and collaborate with these women here? Because why is something made in Italy considered a value, but something handcrafted and unique and special and beautiful and artisanal is considered charity? Like, we need to change that model. Luxury can come out of Africa, and that doesn't mean that you just take the resources, the ideas, the people, the cotton, the chocolate, and then put the value someplace else. But that's something made in Africa you think of as made with quality and is associated with that, and a narrative change. So it was a lot of different things that kind of came together as to why we wanted to do this. We settled in Ghana because Brima's family is Ivorian and Ghanaian. And it's been a few years. We did our first presentations at the Lower East Side Girls Club. Now we just did our huge presentation, which was our first one back after the quarantine last year. We did a show where we had all our seamstresses and tailors as the VIP front line at our factory, watching the collection come down. And this year we were honoring the anniversary of 9/11, the 20-year anniversary, with a song Uproot Andy put together that he had actually recorded 20 years ago on the sounds that he encountered over 5 days after 9/11. So we opened with that, and then we had a Farsi singer and our friend Bridget, who was singing with her to explain what she was saying. And then we had Sarah Jones, who wrote an incredible piece. She's a brilliant spoken word artist, and she does multiple different characters and one-woman shows. I will say, I literally made her my friend. I was like, kept seeing her shows and was like, this woman has to be my friend. And then all these years later, she was wearing Studio 189 and performing. And we did a moment of silence, and we had dancers, and this is what we always do. We bring a lot of celebration and joy and our heritage, and, you know, to Fashion Week. You know, we really see fashion as an agent of social change. We're an ethical, sustainable brand. We do upcycling. You know, we're natural dyes. We work with indigo, old techniques. You know, we're slow fashion, you know, because fast fashion is killing us. And yeah, it's another thing that I'm super passionate about, showing the world that they can vote with their time, their energy, their actual vote in the elections, and they can vote with their dollar. And that's just, yeah, I guess voting is my number one thing. And I even managed to figure that out in fashion.
Well, congratulations on the line, and congratulations on the clarity of the vote, tying everything together.
Can you tell I'm concerned about the midterms? I'm just going to keep plugging voting.
just to keep coming through in every little way. But Rosario, thank you so much for joining us. And folks, Dopesick is going to premiere on Hulu on October 13th. So thank you again.
Thank you so much.